Hi everyone, and welcome to the Performance Cafe. Specifically, I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the Coffee Companions series where we share coffee, biscuits, knowledge, and talk learnings every Friday. We focus on human performance in organizations today, whether large or small. Today, I've got with me Zanele Njapha, or as her clients say, the UnLearning Lady. In the face of disruptive change, Zaneli assists teams to navigate various transitions, become future fit, and boost creativity by cracking the unlearning code. This is done by facilitating the understanding that learning, unlearning, and relearning must be the crux and heart of an organization's DNA if they wish to adapt to a shifting climate. I'd like to introduce you to Zaneli, who also is the host of the podcast Future Fit Fridays. And it is really a great place for all entrepreneurs all over to go and look for ways to run businesses that are future fit. Welcome, Zanele.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. I've been looking forward to this. I used to do a bit of change management and stuff, so I'm ready for this conversation and to learn what's happened since, back in the days of the dinosaur, I used to do it.
That's perfect.
Give us a bit of an intro on yourself. Tell us a bit who you are and where you come from.
Sure. So Zanele Njapha, as you said so beautifully, is the UnLearning Lady, and that's what my clients refer to me as. And I am basically a transitions facilitator. So I help transitioning organizations to move from one normal, as we can now call it, to a completely different normal. And during phases of research, what I actually found was that it's that beginning or initial unlearning that trips a lot of organizations up from transitioning. So that's why I position myself to say, let's rather focus on ensuring that organizations become very nimble, so they're able to unlearn who they once were so that they can transition easily. It's the organizations that can unlearn a past identity really, really well and really, really quickly that are the ones that move from one normal to the next just at the drop of a hat. So my past life, if I can call it that, is actually as a primary school teacher. And this is where I sort of started to understand educational psychology, how people learn, how people transition, how you and I process knowledge, etc., which led to what I do today.
That is amazing. And I suppose a great place to go, because how much children, they only learn what we teach them. So when you got small children and you had to work with them, they couldn't have had as much learning to unlearn as a grown-up. What did that teach you?
Well, the interesting thing is that actually I found that children were much better unlearners than adults are. And the big joke that I often make is that all of these future skills that we try to sort of reestablish in organizations are skills that children were born with, skills that children don't even have to think about. Think about how playful or resilient or inquisitive children are. Those are actually future skills that help organizations at a large scale to be nimble. But children fall down in the playground, they pick up worms and they eat them. That's all resilience and this ability to adapt consistently.
Okay, so I'm kind of hoping that worms are not part of your prescription in organizations.
Not at all.
I get your point. And do you think we actually almost train that out of them as they grow up, and that's why we see what we see in organizations?
I love that point. And consistently, research has actually told us that you and I are a lot more creative when we're younger. And the older we get, and I'm nervous about using this word old because it means different things to different people, but the more mature you and I get, the less creatively we can think, the less novel ideas we can think of. And so that's why unlearning plays such a key part in getting organizations to come back to that. So it's not that you don't have the adaptive capacity, it's that you've unlearned it. So, and you started to build in all of these other systems and ways of thinking that restrict you from being creative, from being innovative. And now we just need to unlearn what society's sort of beaten into you so that we can get back to sort of where we all used to be at one stage.
That is amazing. That is inner child kind of stuff. I do enjoy that. As you know, I'm a strengths coach. And so I think part of my inner child is living my strengths, which I think also would help in the process because we do what comes naturally, right? So talking about where we're working from, so many businesses have lockdown exhaustion and want to go back to normal. What, if anything, does this say about their ability to learn and unlearn?
Wow, that's a very good question. And I've heard it so often, and not just from organizations, but from individuals, from startups, small, larger organizations, all saying, oh, we can't wait for this to get back to normal. We can't wait for everything to be back to the way that it used to be. And I think, to your question, what this is actually indicating is that our adaptive capacity or our ability to unlearn is actually quite low, or we're sort of incapable, or we haven't been trained to unlearn rapidly enough. Because what we're expecting is for everything to sort of stay the same. And it's weird because we understand the concept of change in different parts of our lives, personally around how our bodies change, about where we live and all of these types of things. But when it comes to the way we work our organizations or our strategies or our product lines, for some reason, we just can't seem to let go of things that we've become so used to and attached to, and even associated with our identity. And this is the biggest part, one of the biggest parts of unlearning, is that it's really tricky because you start to associate it with who you are. And this is what a lot of organizations do. They attach, oh no, this is what we do. This is what we're known for. This is how things work at this company, which is a very popular one. This is how we do things at company X, and that's just how it is. And so because you've associated it with who you are, when that particular framework is no longer relevant, then we sort of start to question who you are as an organization. So there is no normal to go back to, unfortunately. And I'm sure so many people have now come to that realization. And the quicker we can unlearn not just that mentality, but the identity of who we used to be, the quicker we can sort of take on a new identity and run with that until it's time to unlearn again.
So you've now asked, or you've mentioned a topic quite close to my heart, and that is organizational culture. So are you saying that it would help that instead of making this product, service, whatever it is, part of our culture, if we make unlearning part of our culture, does that work that way? How does it work?
Exactly. So that really is the best way to do it. So rather than saying, how do we change? What do we do? How do we react? How do we respond? The best thing that organizations can do for themselves at this time, and even individuals, I like to speak on both the organizational level and the individual level, because the individual is going through as much change as the organization. So what I always say is that if you increase your ability, or your capacity rather, to change, it means that whatever happens consistently as you go on, whether the company needs to merge in 2 years' time, you bring a little baby into the world while the organization is going through change, there's a leadership shift, you understand that the identity that you carried before is now going to need to sort of fall behind. And when I say fall behind here, a lot of people will say, oh my goodness, do you mean that I need to completely let go of who I used to be? And so I always like to clarify that one of the best things about unlearning is that you do it best when you take something from that past identity with you. So it's a kind of learning. It's something that we've gained, that we take into the future with us, so that we don't necessarily feel this loss. Because unlearning and any kind of transitioning is really difficult because of the loss aspect. Think about when you move house. It becomes really, really tough because you go, oh my goodness, all of the memories that I had in this old house, everything that we did in there, oh my goodness, that wall, this, that, and the other. But when you take something from the old house, some people will take a little piece of paint, dried paint, or maybe a brick or something, and they will take it into the new house with them, so that every time they look at that, it helps them to understand what they've gained from the old house so that they can move forward. And this is one of the things I often advise organizations and individuals to do, that makes it even easier for you to transition and sort of helps you to unlearn a little bit better, to move out of that old house without feeling, oh my goodness, I wish I could go back there. But you carry those lessons forward with you and then understand what is ahead for you in that possible future or identity that you're driving into. And then to speak to the culture part of it then, this is the really important part. And when I teach my concepts of unlearning and I work with transitioning organizations, I always say it's important to start off with understanding where you're going. and also understanding where you are. So understand your context as best as you can, and then also understand what the future possibly holds for you and your organization. And this is in different frameworks. And then I speak about my LEAD principles, which I won't necessarily go into now, but they are just about how do we lead through a transition. And then lastly, now this is the cultural part to answer your question, is all about how do you make it click? Because the reason why about 70% still at this day, since about 1993, when that stat first came out, that transformation initiatives fail is because they don't change us at an individual level, and they fail to understand how individuals actually change. And you'll hear a lot of people go, oh, don't think just because, you know, the companies have merged that things are different around here. It's because at that cultural level, the change hasn't actually happened. People haven't unlearned. They're still attached to what they used to be. And so the last aspect I teach is how do we make it click? And this how do we make it click is how do we embody it in our culture? How does it seep right down to who we are and our identity so that we live it and we breathe it and we speak it and every part of us. And so this, I will then advise habits, routines, and rituals, because habits, routines, and rituals is how we live out who we are. If you want to know what kind of a person an individual is, you look at their habits, routines, and rituals, and they'll tell you exactly what that person is aiming towards. So I think that when it comes to working with that framework of unlearning, it's always best to get it at a cultural level. Otherwise, it doesn't last. It never lasts.
So, Zanele, thank you for showing the connection between the transition and the business culture and unlearning. A question I have for you is so many people, especially larger corporates, say, I don't have the time, I don't have the money to change every person's mind. They're just here for the money. What do you say to people in those circumstances?
That's a good question. And actually, we do get that a lot. Because I think a lot of organizations understand that transformation initiatives or processes actually do take a lot of investment. They take a lot of investment in terms of finances. They also take a lot of investment in terms of time, because you can't just say in 2 years' time, everything will be hunky-dory, because any kind of unlearning process in an organization takes a very, very long time. And I mean, up to about 5 or so years, we're still trying to embed those thinking, those perspectives into our actual organizational culture. So I strongly agree with that. And that's something that takes a whole lot of time. So what I would say to that is that there are so many ways to work around that. So the first one would be understanding that it's not going to take a short amount of time. You need to decide, and this is what I often tell my clients, you need to decide whether it's the results that you want and sacrificing the engagement, or do you want the engagement, which at the end of the day drives the results? So this is the big thing. And if you want those results, you need to engage. You need to invest in the engagement that then seeps down into the individual cultural level. Because if you've got an organization where the individuals are not engaged or fully buying into the change process, it will crumble, and it'll actually set you back a lot further than you were before. And I think that so many organizations can actually attest to that. So it's worth that investment. And once you understand just how much the return is going to be, when each and every individual in the organization is a kind of billboard for where you want to go and who you are and the identity that you want to embody, it pays off. Because an individual who hasn't necessarily unlearned their old identity is going to relapse back into it. So back into that culture that you used to have that you want to unlearn. So I would definitely say make that investment and do what you have to do to get there.
Awesome. And that makes so much sense, because as you say, it's engagement that drives the number, that drives the revenues. Do you find, and this might be a gross generalization on my part, but do you find that millennials, younger employees unlearn more and are happier to adapt to change? I know we see that they've got, they tend to work in 2-3 year sprints at an organization. Is that stereotype somehow supported, or is it just a stereotype?
I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but that's what I've identified as well. So there is definitely that capacity to unlearn and that drive to change is quite consistent with our Gen Zs and our millennials, as you say. And then we find that our baby boomers and everyone else will be a little more reluctant, because what's happened with them, and there's this lovely quote, I'm just trying to think of the author of the quote, who says, if anything happens to you before around the age of 35, it's okay. It's just the new order of things. But if it happens to you after, much later in your life, then it's as if the whole world is in complete turmoil. So that's literally what happens. And going back to the neuroscience of how you and I learn, when something has been consistently practiced, or a neurological circuit has been consistently fired, it actually hardwires. And that's the way that habits and routines and rituals work. The more you do it, and because your brain is always trying to save you energy, it doesn't want to put in too much hard work, because it wants the rest of your body to do that. So it wants to jump to the default. And when something becomes that default, you sort of get into this consistent cycle of doing that. And because it's easier, even when you want to change, this is why unlearning is so challenging. Even when you want to, it becomes harder, because you've practiced it for so long and it makes sense. Even your vision, or even some of your insights around defaults and everything else, always point to that way of doing it, because that's how you've always done it. It makes sense. You've calculated it. It's a foolproof strategy. And because you've sort of limited yourself around how you horizon scan and you've put on your blinkers, nothing else makes sense. But when millennials and Gen Zs come from the organizations, because they've got a lot more of a fresh perspective, they've got larger insights, maybe not necessarily in terms of experience, obviously, because they haven't maybe been around the industry for much longer, but because they're a lot more open in terms of other things that they're exposed to, that they can sort of put into the mix, things like art and social media and tech, that all can come into the mix of creating these newfound business models and everything else. It makes it easier for them to change. And to your point that you were making just now, because they live on this constant tiny feed of information at a time, and if you look at TikTok, they look at something 2 seconds and then it's gone. And it's this consistent change and moving from one thing to another, which they bring into the business. But they come into the organization and they meet individuals who go, this is how we've always done things at company X. And that's when you start to see that clash.
That is amazing. And, it makes so much sense. So I'm not exactly millennial or Generation X, but I'm not going to commit to anything more than that. But for example, my father was raised in a house where he went into the trade that his father was in. They both worked for the same company all of their lives. I suppose there's a lot of hard wiring that's been done by being, not only are you in that business, but your father was in that business. So it's all sort of like double reinforced almost.
That's true. It's true. And I think my parents were exactly the same. And they even had a situation where if the father had lapsed his time in the organization, he would be the one to recommend someone to come into his place. And it would probably be the son, like you were saying, or the daughter. They would come into the organization and replace the father. So it would be this continuation, hence, that very long job tenure that we don't see anymore.
Yes, I must say, I'm glad those are gone. I've had a lot of fun with all the organizations I've worked for across the years. So one of the things that sort of came up when I was preparing for our talk is unlearning only related to innovative aspects of the business? So, for example, the R&I department, the client service department, or is it a whole company kind of thing? And why?
That's a very good question, because I often get people who just go, okay, we're going to sit you down with our strat team or our R&D team. And I think they're actually asking that exact same question and missing the point, is that it's really going back to what I said before. It's that increasing that capacity to adapt. And that capacity to adapt is obviously relevant in your R&D team. It's relevant for the team that strategizes. It's even relevant for your change managers in the organization. But it's also relevant for everyone, because it's each and every individual within the organization that's responsible for any kind of change. We all need to unlearn. I mean, look at COVID-19 and what it's done. From the person who works to make coffee for everyone in the office to the CEO himself. or herself, we all had to unlearn. So it's relevant for everyone. And because we all have to adapt, and I'm just going to make a random example, being a PA. The other day I was speaking at a PA and EA's conference. Being an EA is not what it used to be before COVID-19. It's not what it used to be 10 years ago, where it was just swivel chair jobs. You swivel from one side to the middle and you type something in, you swivel, you file it. It's completely different. So each and every individual in the team needs to learn how to unlearn, not just for the organization's benefit, but also for their own personal benefits, because we're seeing so much mental and psychological effects of change on individuals that don't know how to unlearn. And nowadays, we've got so many crumbling individuals within our organizations, all because that capacity to change from one normal to another is not quite well developed.
So an interesting question to toss at you. I've been hanging out with futurists the past week. They say there is no normal. What do you say?
I strongly agree. And I think the reason why they say that is because so many of us define normal differently. So some people will go, normal is something that I can come to expect. I know it's a given. There's nothing else that's going to pop out of the closet unexpectedly. And for other people, they'll go, normal is the way that I'm doing things now. And so it's about which definition of normal you're actually using that you can start to speak to. So I understand why they would go, no, there's no normal, because they want to raise awareness within people that there's nothing that you should be complacent with. There's no place where you should settle. Mm-hmm. And this is why they then say that there's no normal. But the reason why I use that normal term is because it's familiar to us. And the reason why I will use it in the context of old normal or new normal or next normal is because it's only the way you do things for a certain amount of time until it's not, all over again. So in a way, it's normal, and in a way, it's also not normal.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you for that. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest challenges that you face in change is that people don't want to understand that predictability is no more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It isn't. It really, really isn't. I think at one point, if you think about it, we really did put predictability on a pedestal, where it was important for our clients and our customers always to know what to expect from us. And in that sense, we can't necessarily chuck that away, because it is still relevant. You want to be consistent. I think that's maybe the mix-up that we're making. It's this consistency that's important. People must know what to expect from us, what to expect from our brand, and the same level of customer service, et cetera, et cetera. But otherwise, what it means to be us may not be the same thing in 10 or so years' time. And I like to use the story of the ice industry to display this very point that we're actually talking about now. And it's just, to summarize it, it starts off with the idea that when the refrigeration industry actually started, the way that they used to carry out their service or their product was that they would stay over in the north and they would harvest blocks of ice from the frozen ponds in the north, and they would ship those down and then bring those down to the people. But then 20, 30 years down the line, where they no longer had to do that, they had ice factories and ice trucks where they could then store the ice and then transport it in the ice trucks to people's homes. 30, 50 years down the line, we now have our refrigerators. And the interesting thing about this story that Guy Kawasaki, who's worked extensively in innovation, actually tells, he says that the interesting thing about the story is that none of the entrepreneurs or the organizations that either owned a business that harvested ice in the north were actually inventors of the refrigerator or owned a refrigeration company. Because what they then did, or they did back then, was that they fixed their minds on, we cut blocks of ice. That's what we do. That's what our organization stands for. And when it comes to cutting blocks of ice, we'll innovate. We'll do the best thing. Rather than saying, we keep people's food cold, so that in 30 years' time, when keeping people's food cold meant something completely different from cutting blocks of ice, they could still show up for it. They could still be relevant for it. So it's that limiting and not understanding really what it is that our clients and customers expect from us that doesn't allow us to unlearn, because we've sort of limited ourselves and we've put ourselves in this little box and that doesn't allow us to be nimble and change who we are. Other than, and then this fits so nicely to your question.
That is an excellent example. But now I have a question for you. Is that lack of innovation and technology due to the hardwired elements in our brain, which I get their neural pathways, and so, they have to be broken down for something new to be learned? Or do you think it was just the fact that all of the major technological advances sort of happened after 1925?
That's a very good question. And that's often what happens. And I love that question because it reminds me of a professor, Dr. Kostub, who works on design thinking. So he's an expert on design thinking. And what he says is that a mistake that so many organizations or startups make is that they start with technology and they go, okay, I have a technology. How can I use it to serve society? Instead of going, what does society need? Let me think of a technology that can speak exactly to that. And so if you then take that back to think about this sort of evolution or revolution in the refrigeration industry, being what you are and responding with the tools that were present at that time is really what the idea is. And then as times change, you then start to ask yourself, what tools are now available to respond to what the customer needs, what my client needs now? What's the best way to respond to what they need now from me and what they do with what they need from me, more importantly?
So I love that you say that, because it's quite interesting, because when we do visions and strategy with companies, the vision is not the technology. The vision should be, how do I serve my client? Not what tool do I have and how am I going to use it? So that makes so much sense from that perspective. This is the Performance Cafe, and at some point I'm going to talk people and I'm going to talk performance. How does the lack of unlearning show up at an individual, employee, and team level? If I was a manager and someone wasn't doing well with change, what am I going to see with that person?
Okay, that's a very good question. And the one thing that you're definitely going to see is resistance to change. And this is going to show up in so many different ways. And sometimes resistance to change actually shows up as pushing back. And a lot of teams will go, a lot of leaders will go, oh my goodness, so-and-so is just pushing back at the change. And I don't know what's going on. We need to just make sure that we take them out of the picture before they influence the change process. But really, it's that understanding that an individual who doesn't have the vision alive for them is not going to let go of what's familiar to them. And so we need to go back and say, okay, I understand that you're resisting, and your resistance is showing up either in collating a team within the organization, and you're speaking about how unsuccessful the change process is going to be among the team, or it's showing up with your lack of participation during meetings, or it's showing up in how you're now, let's use the word slacking, but I'm sure there's a whole bunch of better words, but how you're not necessarily showing up in your work. And those are all different forms of resistance that individuals that haven't unlearned are going to show within a changing organization, or an organization that's trying to move from one identity to another. And I strongly always advise that leaders look out for this, especially because when we start, what I often suggest is that we start with making sure that the vision is alive. So I call it a live vision, alive for everyone, so that even the individual who is looking out for a grandmother at home who's dying has the vision speak to them at an individual level. Then that individual will then understand, how do I let go of what I know and what's become so familiar? Because the new vision has there's a sense of urgency, but it also speaks to me and my needs and desires at an individual level. So it's easier for them. But unless that's alive, he's going to go, no, because remember, there's that sense of loss that's associated with it. So he's going, I'm going to lose so much. As a team, we're going to lose so much. So no ways, I'm not jumping on the new ship. And then you feel this pushback that you think, he's a horrible guy, but it's actually not the case.
And how much of that comes from, I want to say, poor communication? I'm not talking about, of course, your implementations, but, when managers are incapable of speaking to and influencing team members, because surely the message is coming from them and not from you.
That's a very good question. Yes, a very big part of it is communication and how we speak about the change and how we communicate with each other, especially from leadership down, and then from the team as a bottom up as well. Mm-hmm. Both are extremely important. And one of my lead principles is actually acknowledge, appreciate, and announce. And that one is heavily based on communication, especially, and on the side of leaders, especially communicating not just in your actions as a kind of billboard for the change so that people understand how it's going to work and that it is going to work, but also the use of tone, the use of words, and avoiding using any words or terms that sort of undermine the process or undermine the team's capability to actually carry it out, or being sarcastic. I know sometimes, some of us use sarcasm as a way to make jokes, but during such a sensitive time, as a time when people are, as I like to use the image of a trapeze artist, where people are jumping from one swing and trying to hold on to something new, it's such a fragile time that how you communicate and the consistency at which you communicate needs to be so consistent that people can, and I know this is maybe an interesting image, but people can actually feel that they are safe in your arms, so to speak, because this is the time when leaders who can help teams to build that trust really are the ones that see a success in transitioning and in any kind of change processes.
And I agree with you. And I want to make a comment, and please, it's not a judgment, but we in South Africa saw that when the president changed the intervals at which he addressed the nation. Suddenly, and everyone went, where is he? What's happening? Why is he gone? And it was so funny because it was like, hold on, Dad's left the room. Where's Dad? And yeah, and everyone sort of sat up and noticed it. And the rest of the time, while I was ticking along, it was kind of, we know he's there. It's fine. Whether you're listening or not is beside the point. He's there. But the moment he was gone, it was like, okay, hold on, I'm at risk. What's going on? So I must admit, I hear exactly where you're coming from. Awesome. So my very first coffee companion was a lovely lady by the name of Leonie Fourie. I know her quite well. She is a resilience coach. And one thing that she kept on saying is that the most important point about being resilient is the choice. The choice of, I'm going to stop what I'm feeling, or I'm going to at least suspend it or stop myself and first analyze this, understand this, and then move forward. Or the choice of, I'm going to take that communication and rather try and understand it instead of just reacting to it. And I wanted to ask you, she put so much emphasis on the role of choice in unlearning, in resilience. Is it the same for you in unlearning and relearning?
I guess it would be, but maybe not so much, because then it would sound like you have to harvest a lot of willpower, which you do, but it doesn't necessarily play the biggest role. But it plays a very big role in terms of habit creation. So when you create habits and you create lasting behavior change, then yes, because I always liken it to marriage. I mean, or any kind of commitment that you make, that at one point you choose that individual, but it's not every single morning where you're going to roll over and be okay with that choice. So that's why you have to choose it again. And you wake up every morning and you choose that person again. You wake up the next morning and you choose them again. And that's literally how unlearning works, because the reason or the way that your brain will create a new neural pathway that causes a previously dominant one to start pruning is because you've traveled that one with such consistency that it ends up then building that automaticity. But that's the only way that it's going to happen, is if we choose it, even at times where it feels like, oh my goodness, I dread this. It's only for the benefits of the boss, or really, I can't see how much this is going to assist me. It's in those moments. So I guess choice really is a very big part of it. And I like that. because it plays a very big part in not only unlearning, but then when it comes to relearning, starting afresh and saying, okay, what's this new identity all about? How do I start to embody this? What's on the other side for me that I can start to hold on to and get comfortable with? It takes a lot of openness that I guess, yeah, you do have to choose. I love it.
Awesome. And so I would think that when people have made that choice, when they've been through a cycle with you of unlearning and relearning, there must be a bit of boost of confidence because, you know, I was staring down the throat of this dragon. I'm through it. And actually, you know what? I made it and I'm better for it. Have you ever had that kind of experience?
I have, yes. A lot of the teams that I've worked with will come out with that, but it's a process because you might know the saying that any kind of change, it starts off really hard, in the middle it's extremely messy, and at the end it's beautiful, because that's literally how it is. And at the beginning, the funny thing that I've noticed is in that hard part where you're having to let go and deal with that loss of what you've associated with, it's so hard to the point where you actually don't want to go on. You refuse to even see what's on the other side for you, even though what's on the other side may look like it's ready for you and it's comfortable enough for you and you are going to survive. You're not going to die. But still, because of how challenging that is, it sort of creates a kind of barrier for you to then move on. So I do find that teams that get at least to that neutral zone, what William Bridges calls the neutral zone, in the middle of letting go and grabbing hold, that they at least start to have that optimism. Because that's when we go, okay, what's on the other side for us? Can what's on the other side actually take us? Will we be okay? Then there's that, okay. Because you're not so attached anymore. So that loss has now been dealt with, because a big part of the work that I do is let's deal with the loss that's associated with that change, and let's unlearn who we used to be by dealing with that loss. So that when teams get to the middle, then that neutral zone, they go, okay, this is not so bad. You know, and then you start to see that. And then right at the end, then there's a lot more. But what I always advise is that there's not necessarily an end, because that process is a process that you go through all of the time. It never really ends, if you think about it, which is sad, but good, but more sad.
I hear you, because I suppose I wrote a blog a couple of days ago, well, probably a couple of weeks ago by now, about the importance of the butterfly emerging, that it needs the pressure, you know, to come out. And I've heard recent research, I'm not a mother, but where they're saying that chiropractors are actually manipulating babies that are born by C-section because they also lack the pressure because they're born through C-section. And it's so interesting because you're right, it is that pressure. But when you come out on the other side, oh boy, are you beautiful. Until the next time.
Until next time we have to do it again. So that doesn't just need to be a once-off thing. I always say unlearning mustn't be a once-off thing. It must be something that is just built into who you are. That's why I always encourage people do it at a personal level. Like, be a good unlearner personally. Change your style, change the look of your room, change your routine so that you're better with it. So that when you get to the organization, it just comes so easily to you because it's how you live your life.
How much of that unlearning do you think is actually blocked by our perception? So, for example, if you come from a very puritanical family, you know, there's right, wrong. There is, you will do it this way, you won't do it that way. So you're almost trained to, you have to have certain things in order for you to be worthy.
That's a very good question. I like that. Wow. I think there's just so much in that I can think of that comes across to me. And it really takes us to not only disassociate on a thinking level, but go a lot deeper than that. And hence why there's that need to deal with the loss, because some of these things, and this is where I started, go so deep that we associate them with who we are. And even our biases start to wrap around these perceptions so that we own them and we protect them. And one that I like is the bias of thinking that people are very much like you. And I watched an interesting show on Netflix once, actually speaking about the shared consensus bias. And they had individuals, and I hope I'm going to keep it nice and clean. They had individuals with fully clothed just sit on the toilet and then run them through what they would do if the toilet paper ran out. And each and every individual went, oh, okay, when I put the toilet paper back in, I make sure that the toilet paper is hanging this way around. And then another one would say, I make sure it's hanging the other way because, and then what's funny is that the person would then go on to say, because I know that everyone else does it or everyone else prefers it that way, which I thought was so profound and speaks to exactly what you're saying, that you and I own these identities so much that we protect them. And this is where I often start with unlearning, is that ability and being okay with being wrong and understanding that you're not always going to be right. And some of the identities that you've held onto are actually quite flawed, and biases are a very big part of what I do. So understanding that those identities are flawed, opening up your perspective, horizon scanning a little bit more, so that then you're a little bit more open to change. Because unless you're still living in that cocoon, like you said, with the butterfly, you're not going to be as open to then seeing those different perspectives and understanding that. But that's a very, very good question. I really like that.
I must tell you, that was actually quite a frightening answer, because a couple of years ago, I went to visit a friend at her beach house. And brother and I had a running thing. When I'm in the bathroom, I turn the toilet paper the right way around. Then when he goes to the bathroom, he turns it around. And two grown-up people spent about 3 days constantly trying. I mean, the poor toilet paper must have been as busy as can be. And you're right. Why did it matter so much? Why did it become a thing? So you're right. It is that thing about unlearning is reaching into our identity. It's more than just changing something quickly. So, my next question for you is, like, do different levels of organizations or businesses have different levels of unlearning and relearning to do? I know we touched on age and things. I don't know if there's something more you'd like to add here.
Different levels of an organization, I would say it depends. It depends on how deeply rooted that part of the organization is, in a way that sort of prohibits them from changing, because it's not always necessarily our tech guys that need to do the most unlearning, or the HR people that need to do the most unlearning. It's all about where we want to go, and then how far that needs us to unlearn in comparison to where we are. So let's say if our HR team is working in line with the trends and they are at a perceivably great level in comparison to maybe our competitors or the industry standard, then that would mean that, yes, they have to know or understand and build their capacity to unlearn, but maybe there's not so much for them to do at this stage. And maybe we can even look into that. What are the different things that they can unlearn that are holding them back from becoming even better? Then we might look at maybe, let's say, our R&D team, or a different team within our organization, that then maybe is just finding it a little bit difficult to catch up or to move a little bit more quicker or a little faster in that sense. Then we can have a look at, okay, what is going on here? Let's build this capacity into you. Let's understand where our industry is at the moment, where an organization such as your own, where are your competitors at the moment, and what do you have the capacity to then do once you unlearn as an organization. So it's different parts of the organization would need different levels of unlearning and relearning, but that capacity needs to be built into everyone, so that whatever the industry or the organization demands of everyone at any given time, they can all respond to it without lagging behind, whether it's in their industry, in their organization, or even on a much larger scale.
Awesome. Wow, that was so useful. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. Zaneli, I've asked a lot of questions, many of them which weren't even prepared. thank you for answering all of them. Is there something that you think I've missed that you think we should know about unlearning and relearning that we've not covered?
Well, we've covered a lot, like you said, excitingly so, because I've enjoyed this so much. I think the only thing that I consistently say is to remind people that it's a work in progress. It is a process. It's a process, and it's a hard process. I want to always, and this is what I do when I run my workshops or I work with clients, is that I start off with making sure that they feel how hard it is. And hence I show a lot of ambiguous images, and I work through a lot of exercises with my clients that almost get them sweating at the beginning so that they feel how hard it is to jump from one perception to another. And then I go, okay, now bottle up that image, bottle up that feeling that you're feeling, and hold it in yourself so that you understand that it's not going to be easy. And hence why people say, I started off the habit of drinking water. It's been 21 days, but I still don't know what's going on. And that's why I often debunk this idea of 21 days. Because like we said, you need to choose it. You need to consistently choose it. And it's not like after 21 days, it's been hardwired into your mind. When it's automatic, that's how you know that it's been hardwired. So it's something that's so consistent. You need to work at it consistently. And it also needs to be iterative, that you are consistently responding to what's going on and then using that to tweak and then move on, and then looking around, using that to tweak and then going on. So I encourage people as they unlearn in their personal lives and at an organizational level to understand that it's challenging, it's messy, but it's possible as long as you take everyone with you and use that engagement to drive the results that you seek.
Awesome. Zanele, thank you so much for your participation today. It was great to have you as a guest. I just want to ask you two more things. Firstly, show us your mug, please. I always find people's coffee mugs very interesting. What's on your list?
Oh, no.
Oh, wow, Leo. Are we in the presence of a Leo? No wonder.
Oh, no. What do you
mean? Are you a Leo?
I am.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Zanele, really, thank you so much for your contribution today. If anyone wants to reach out to you, is there an email address that you can give us?
Yes, there is. And I would be happy to engage with anyone who wants to reach out with me. My website is zanelenjapha.com. And then my email address is zanele@tomorrowtodayglobal.com. So they can reach out to me anytime on that email.
I hope that we will be able to entice you back soon again so that you can tell us more about unlearning, relearning, or any initiatives that you've got going at that point in time.
Thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure. And thanks to everyone who's watching this.
Thanks so much, Zanele. So everyone, I hope you've had as much fun and learned as much today as I did from Zanele. She is really a superstar, and whether you are following her on LinkedIn or whether you are catching up with her on the podcast, there's always much to learn. From my side, I'd like to thank you for listening in again. Please, on our YouTube channel, like, subscribe if you like our show. On LinkedIn and Facebook, every Friday morning at 11, we post our Coffee Companions. On Tuesdays, we've got our regular 10-minute vlog with me. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment, and please tell me if you have anything that you would like me to discuss on the next Performance Cafe. Until then, I hope you have a good week.